Okay, so we haven't actually, we missed each other for a couple of days, so I'm sure everybody is getting on just fine with all of the nice geometry lessons, about how to square things and how to measure things. Whether we're talking about circles and squares and trapezoids and bows and arrows and all these very interesting shapes. So just to give some basic refreshers about what we've been covering, so we covered so far. So a tchum is 2,000 amot around your city. The question is, how do you measure the city limits? So the default is if your city happens to be a perfect square, pretty simple. Now you just measure 2,000 amot around, and you add the corners after you measure 2,000 off of each of the flat sides, and then it's easy. But then it starts getting messy if your city isn't a perfect square. Right? So if your city is let's say is a circle or a half circle or some sort of a trapezoid or a entirely unclear what shape it is shape. And the question is, how are we going to turn it into a usable shape for tchum? For that, so generally our goal is we try to figure out if something is an unclear shape, we tend to push it towards a square, right? We square it off, and the way we square it off is according to the cardinal directions of the world, right? So north, south, east, and west. That's how we do it. So we're also in discussion about how you determine what's north, south, east, and west based on stars, then based on the way that the sun is moving, depending on the time of the year. Again, that's a little bit complicated astronomy lesson for those who aren't used to it. But nowadays, thank God, we have compasses as well as Google Maps, which makes our lives much easier. So we don't really have to do it anymore. But again, if you happen to be, camping in the middle of nowhere and you get trapped with that one, again, the Gemara is good to know. So, again, I highly recommend not being stuck somewhere where you don't have access to the maps and directions.
I don't think that I haven't seen the tchum measured on Google yet, Google Maps.
Okay, so if you'd like, we can try and have fun and measure the tchum of Toronto. It'll be really, really big. I'm just warning you. We can try. When we finish towards the end of Eruvin, we get through all of the material. I'm happy to. We could take like a couple minutes to try and sketch it out and how it would work.
The last page of the pamphlet I sent you shows the tchum as it was in 2013, but I think it may have been updated since then.
Has its tchum on it? Great. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In color, it's different Eruvin that are joined together.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So we'll take a look at that when we finish the parak. We'll take a look at that, so we'll know how the tchum plays out in Toronto. And then if I have any questions on it, then I won't tell anybody, but I'll ask my crop, and then we'll see what the story is, or whoever their Hamasha currently is. But again, we'll find out. Okay, but for now, again, so again, basics of the tchum is you try and square off a city. If the city itself is already square, nice and simple. If it's not square, then it gets complicated. We're discussing cases of where there's gaps in between. How do you measure the gaps? How big a gap can it be before the city is considered to be two separate cities? And that's what we're discussing. So it gets a little messy. So now we're on the top of, again, bottom of Nun Vav Amud Bet into Nun Zayin. So Avaya Amar Meshkaka Lanami B'mata Dehavya Alpha B'Alpha. So initially, we're doing all the nice calculations of the different relative amounts of area you have of the difference between the first 1,000 amot around the city, meaning the Midrash Ha'ir of the Levim, versus the area of the tchum, and how the ratio is going to be 1/4. Then we're playing around with being is the city a square? Is the city a circle? The difference in the area between the two. We concluded that has to be the area that the original city had to be basically a perfect sphere in order for you to get the right ratios for everything to work. And then we said that all the calculations until now were done with a city made of 2,000 amot. So now we're going to try. What if you had a city made up of had a radius of 500, meaning that it's 1,000 by 1. Now we're saying it's the city's 1,000 by 1,000 square. Will that work? So that's what BAYT says. And also the ratio works out for 1,000 by 1,000 city. So tchum and kamahavo, then how much is your tchum then? Then the tchum is 8,000 amot. Kronot havya shitzar. Then if you add in the corners, how much area is enclosed by the corners? not just the tavlaot, right? The 2,000 like on each side things. So if you have the corners, that gives you another 16. Arba de Tchumin, Arba de Krona. They have to remove 4 of from the that don't count as part of the Tchum because they're already part of this of the city, as well as the 4 of the city's corners need square of the city from the edge of the city. So the Kami Habet Tamnia. That means that's 8. So that means that there's 8 there's 8. So that means that there's 8 million square 8 so 8 million square cubits square amot are the area of the Midrash. Then there's 24, which is the area of the whole tchum. So the problem is it's tiltahavu. This is 1/3. This is not 1/4 like you're trying to do like our initial statement was last off. This is a third. Then I just wait a minute. We said this last time. Who said we're talking about a square? It's a circle, and circles are smaller than a square. So by how much? Comma maruba yatar local or via. And we established how much difference in area between a circle and a square. 1/4. Aravia partial shita. So now, so if you're removing 1/4, that means you now have an extra 6. Meaning 6 million amot. So shita me esrim v'arba riva hava. So that means that now we're only saying that 6 is the area of the Midrash, not the previous 8, which means now that we now have 6 out of 24, and now we're back to the ratio being to the Midrash and the rest of the Tchum, because the Midrash being the open area around the Arei Levim. So again, now we have it back to our perfect ratio of 1 to 4. This is what we wanted to have, because we had it in the brightness. So Ravina Amar, my Ravia Tchumim. So no, rather, what do you mean that when we say that the Midrash is 1/4? We don't mean that it's 1/4 of the total area of everything. Rather, it's 1/4 of the Tchum. So therefore, it is with the city, but they're not. But they're saying in terms of you're measuring along one side, the difference is 1,000 versus the 4,000 difference. So that's the difference. It's not referring to the total area, but it's talking about this is on one side. Rashi Amar via de Krano. Rashi said, when do we mean that there's the ratio of 1 to 4? That's saying in terms of the corners, right? Because again, the extra 1 corner that you get based on the you make when you square things off. So you get for the square city. So the Midrash you get up. Like let's say if you're adding to the corner. Let's see. Let me share the Parashah has it. Here we go. Let's share Parashah for everybody. Again, they've got some nice charts here. If somebody, right? So here, so we're now this one over here, we're this picture over here, right? So initially we're talking between circles and squares. We started with the one over here, right? So the circle over here. The initial thought was maybe it's a square, and they're like, nope, it's a circle. Okay, that's how we got to our nice ratio, and it worked out. Then we went to the okay, and then we went to the then we went to the one on the bottom right. That's the one that's saying via the Tchum. It means that it's that the Midrash relative to the Tchum, we're ignoring the area enclosed by the city. And finally, we had our case here where we're talking about is just the corners, and you can see here the extra corner you get for the Midrash, right, is 1,000. You get 1,000 extra, and the extra you get for the Tchum you squared off is this 2,000, and that's how we get to our total our difference being one of our nice golden ratio. Okay, now now Ravashi review it. Somewhere later Ravina Ravashi Hasaviv Tzitiv. Wait, but didn't you say that by the Midrash of the Levim that it's around the whole city? So we talk about only the Midrash is only in the corners. Like this sounds weird. So my Saviv de Krano. When it meant Saviv, it meant it's around it based on the corners. If you don't say that the corner is considered to be all the way around, we have a problem from back in Kochin. We say that the Kohanim used to sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach around it. So Hashkanami, do you really think that they used to take their finger and they used to go all the way around the whole Adon Mizbeach? No, Ella my Saviv Zichron. These only sprinkle by the corners. Kanavi Saviv Zichron. They're here too. These only sprinkle by the corners. Therefore, here also they're sprinkled where also they're for just the corners. So Amarle, or Chavivi, Chosna, Larashi, Haika, Morcha, the Karnata. So Chavivi of Chosna said to Rashi, what about the protrusions of the corners? Right, so wouldn't that mean that you end up losing some of the area? Again, if you square up the original, here, going back here. So basically, so everybody sees here, there's our initial circle. It's the middle part here, but then when we squared it off, so it means there's a little bit that's missing from the Midrash area, right? This little bit right here, this little bit that because the original city was a circle, and we're squaring it off. We lose a little bit over on the edge on these edges right here. Okay, that's lost from our area, so that means something's off. So Amar Le Rabbi. So I just read that. Okay, so B'mata Beigula. Right, the moment of the case is that the city it must be the city is a circle. But wait, what do you mean that it's that if it was in the early square that you lost out the difference in the corners there? But what if the initial of the city was then it stays a circle? Then we're like, wait, but if it's a circle, if you turn to a square anyways, so we're back to square one. Like, how does that help us? No. When we say that you square it off, we don't mean that you square it off for anything else besides the purposes of measuring things. So even so, at the end of the day, the Midrash and the Tchum wouldn't lose any of the area that when we squared the city. But as far as how far out the Midrash and the Tchum would go, it would be based on the larger squared version of the city. Even a little bit of extra area that would be able to be added to the Midrash so that their ratios work out. So that's right. So that's what we're saying here. We're adding this. Okay, let's look at this again. I'm scrolling down so you can see all the photos, but they're all going to come up in just a second. Again, if they're a little weird, that's okay. If anybody needs any help with geometry, please let me know and I'll explain more. If not, I'll assume everybody aced their math exams back in high school. So Amar Le Rav Chanalai Mechos L'Ravashi. So then Rav Chanalai from Mechosna said to Ravashi, Michtei Kama Meruba Yeter Al Agol Ravia. So Rav Chanalai said, how much larger is it? What's the difference between a circle and a square? So the difference is 1/4. So honey tamna. Wait a minute. So now let's do this again. So then isn't the way we did it before? That means it's 800 off of all the corners. Shouldn't we say shit me'av shitinu shva anechet el shouldn't you say that the extra area isn't 800? It's 667 minus 1/3, right? So it's because it's only 2/3 of the area, as you see right here, right? So it's 2,000 on the diagonals, right? So that even though the circumference, right, would be we're not using we're using pi here, so I'll just stop. Anyways, so again, so we're going from here to here, right? From here to here is right, so each side is 2,000, right? To the center of the side is 1,000 each way. All right, so that means that the gap here is 333, right? So that means that on the corners where this gap here, again, before we squared, so meaning the difference is 333 1/3. Okay, again, this is going to get messy because the math, and we're not using pi. So forgive me if this sounds a little foreign. But this is how they used to do math. Well, because they weren't using approximations of pi yet. Even though they didn't know what pi was, the Gemara is not using it. A lot of times you'll see the Gemara doesn't use even though they have ability to measure and they know that what the precise measurement is, they don't use it because for most people that's not a helpful measurement to have. 3 pi. It's like, great. So how far is that? That's not going to help me measure my tchum if I know if it's measure 3 pi, because that's not a measurement that you have on your measuring stick. Measure based on paces. So fractions aren't always so helpful. So, okay, so Amarle, Hani Mile Begula Migo Ribua. No, that's what you had before about the 1/3, the 1/4 is when you have a circle within a square. But if you're talking about the diagonals, you're referring to the diagonals, space added, then there's more that's required, right? There's difference in the ratio between the area enclosed versus the difference that'll be between the distance gained on the diagonal. Amar Mar, Kol Amta Beribua, Amta Tre Chumsha Balsana. As Mar stated, whenever you're measuring an amma on the diagonals posted normally, how do you measure it? By 1 amma and 2/5 of an amma on the diagonals. So as I've been mentioning several times, but again, this is the square root of 2, 1 point approximated, again, which would be 1.414 with a bar over the 1,4. But which for functional usages is 1 2/5, and that's how you should be measuring it. You're measuring it out, measuring based on 1 2/5 for each amma you normally would do. And that's how we get to our nice estimates, and that's how we'll end up having our nice, pretty looking squares. Okay. Okay, now we're on. Okay, so now that we've dealt with squaring and circling, now we're going to get back to measuring at which items are which city elements are considered to be parts of cities. And if any, so hopefully the stuff is familiar. If not, don't worry. We'll be reviewing it as we go along. So, notin carpe fla'ir. Meir says that every city you get the 70 2/3 extra area is considered to be still part of that city. Meaning, so when you start measuring your tchum, you start 70 2/3 outside the city, you start measuring your tchum, not from the wall, but 70 2/3 later. Because that every city has this little, nice area around it that's meant to be left empty, and that's still part of your city. The Chum say no. When we're talking about Karpef, that's only meant that buffer zone. It's only meant just to figure out is this one city or is it two cities? Meaning that if each one has 70 and 2/3 on each side, then that's right. So then if each of the cities' buffers overlap, then we say the cities combine. If they don't, then they do not. So again, that was the top one, right? So we have two different parts, seeing how they combine. Now we're talking about the case of if it's all in a triangle, right? How does that work in a triangle case? Okay, so again, there's a lot of words here talking about some of the way we pass and the combination. So we won't have time to get into it. But again, if you're interested, here's is downloadable online from Hebrew Books. And if you'd like to read more about it there, you're welcome to. Also, there are many good books written in general on swim. If you'd like more of them, please ask me and I'll send you more of the books, whether they be, and let me know if your preferred language is Hebrew, English, or English. As far as Yiddish goes, I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar with the Yiddish literature. So if you had, so that was the case one versus two cities, right, in a row. Similarly, if you have three in a triangle, so similarly, if you have in the triangle, if there's only 141 1/3 separating two outer villages, the middle village will be able to combine them all into one, right? So as you see here, right? So they can all, if the gap between this city and the middle city is actually less than 141, we basically drag this city up to be level with the other two cities. Okay, again, this will be explained a little more in the Gemara. I know it's a little strange, but basically, if they're sufficiently close together, right, within the 2,000 amma of each other, then we allow this to slide on up and view them as if they're all actually no difference between them. Okay, and it's a little strange, but that's what's going to be explained more in terms of the Gemara, and then we'll see how that plays out. Okay, so now we're trying to figure out. Now, so now we're going back to the Okay, so again, I'll stop sharing for now, just because we're going to be referring to the we're going to be doing some drashot and explaining how to measure it, and not talking about the particular measurements for a little bit. So, how do you know about the measurement of the 72 thirds and that you get the buffer zone? So, Amarabba Damakra Mikir Ha'ir Bachutza. Matora Ten Chutza Ba'asakach Madod. So, Rabbi says, the Pasuk says, you shall measure by the area of the Vim, you shall measure from the wall of the city and outward. That's Amal. So, based on the fact that it says the word Chutza, right? So, it's saying the Chutza is considered to be another area, right? There's the Kir Ha'ir, and there's Chutza. Means that you've got your wall, and then you measure then you measure the Karpef area of 72 thirds, and then that's when you start measuring, right? So you leave the 72 thirds, 10 chutza, so 72 thirds, and then you start measuring. So the only between cities we say that, not for a city that's not near anything else. It's only relevant for measuring the distance between two different cities. So Itmar. So we have a solution. Amar Notnin Karpef Lazu Karpef Lazu. So Rahuna says we're measuring this whether or not two cities combine or not. You measure 72 thirds for each. For 1241 and third. So Barav says, no, you actually get 72 thirds between the two of them. You don't measure off of each of the cities. So, we're in the Mishnah. So, right. So, what the Eruvin says that you only say that Karpev is between two cities. So that implies that this again from Funa. It sounds more like Barav's opinion. My Karpev, Torah Karpev. Now, say we give it a Karpev around it. We don't mean that only a Karpev. You start using the rules, the laws of Karpev of the measuring the 72 thirds. And each of them attaches to each of the cities. So really it's 72 thirds and 72 thirds. You also look for this half based on the latter half. It says in the latter half of the Mishnah. We also see that really follow the opinion in the latter half of the Mishnah. It states if you give this one 70 and a bit, the other one 70 and a bit, and then you're making a karpeh for each of them in order that the two can become one. Therefore, that implies you're making a karpeh for each of them. So now that we've said that, now limit to have a chiyah barav. So this means that chiyah barav is wrong. So you're now going to turn to the page. Amar chiyah barav. Money or marry. So what would chiyah barav say? He says no. The Mishnah is according to Rabbi Meir, you only get one karpef, and that's how he would say that he'd still be able to say his own opinion. That's why you only measure 72 thirds, not 141 and 2 thirds. So Rabbi Meir, no take karpef la'ir, Rabbi Meir. Wait, so what do you mean? So then in the first half of the Mishnah should have read simply. Rabbi Meir says you give a karpef to the city. Why did he say? Let's turn back and read the Mishnah. What Rabbi Meir had said. Don't need karpef later to Rabbi Meir. So that's what he. So that's what he said. So then, right? So then we're like, wait. So Rabbi Meir said the first half. Then why does he not mention the second half then? Right? So what's going on here? How is Rabbi Meir stating two different things if he's only mentioned once? Normally, if let's say there's a whole lot of things said by one person, it would say everything he says, and then it would say who argues with him. Why would it be out of order here? No, it's very sad. No, what there was teaching us that normally you've thought that if Rabbi Meir's statement is mentioned in the first case, he says that for a single city, for one city you get to measure one karpef, and for two cities it's the same thing. So here you're saying no, that you get one. If it's for one city, you measure 72 thirds. But if it's two cities, then each of them will get their own karpef area. So, if you had said the case of two cities, you would say that's because you may have said that the reason why you get two carpets is because two nearby cities is then it'd be too crowded if you have only one empty area. Each city needs this extra breathing space because you don't want to be overcrowded. But here with one city, you might say that it's that who needs an empty space to measure for the tchum when there's nothing around the city? It's fine. It's got plenty of space outside. Who needs an extra carpet for the extra empty area around the city as a buffer zone? So you would have said that it doesn't get any carpet if it's only one city. But for two cities, right? I understand why we got 141. But for one city, So no, and below is three. So therefore, you say you wouldn't need any at all. So that's why it has to say in the Mishnah that you get either in the case of one or in the two cities that carpet is still relevant. Because the Chachamim's opinion is that it's only relevant for two cities, as opposed to Eruvin that says it's relevant for one city or for two cities. Carpet is a relevant din. Okay. Now I'm learning the Mishnah. וכן שלושה כפרים משולשים, אם יש בין שניים מחיצונים 140 ואמה ואחת אמה או שליש, עושה אמצעי של שלושה להיות אחד. So again, so when you have the case of, we're still trying to figure out what the case is. So again, now I'm gonna try back again because now we're at the case where we have multiple things moving around. So again, so now we have our three cities, right? So again, so it's the question is this only when there's three cities, or is this all so that we can deal with carpet, or maybe only when there's two? So which is saying the Shoshak Farim Mishlashin, Imish Ben Shazam Mev. Around why did I have to say this entire part of the Mishnah again? Right? So when are we talking about the other 2000? It's only when we have these extras. But if when there's a third city, then that is relevant. But if there's only two, then that wouldn't be. So the Eruvin is wrong. The Eruvin, the two villages, you wouldn't even need the village because each of them would get 141 on each side. So why do we even need the third one? How is that relevant? How is that helping us? Eruvin got a solution. Amar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Idi, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Lomo Shushalshin Mamish, Elo Sharowan, Kol Shilu Matil Amzai Beneam, Yu Mushalshin, Ein Ben Zelazeh Ela Mea, Va'arba'im, Ama, Bachat Ushlish, Asa Emsai Eshlashtan Leot Echad. This is the sliding on up of the whole lower city. If there is the gap between them, is it more than again 141 between this one and the middle city that's a little bit down here? This thing has to slide all the way on up, and that's how we're doing it. Right now, there's 141 from here to there, because that would be obvious. If there's only 141 between each city, that they would all be at that would be the same as the previous case. So the Kiddush is that even if, let's say, it's a little bit staggered, that you can still slide on up this bottom city. So the difference in between and a straight line distance between them is 100. Again, if you had put them all in the same line, then it would be 141. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. That's what the Kiddush is of the second half of the Mishnah. With these three kids of three. So Amarle Rava Labaye. So saying how big the different gap can be in order for it to slide it up. Amarle Alpine Amma. He says the distance that you can slide it on up with is only if it's 2,000 amot away from each of the cities. So wait, but what about the case we had about the Keshet? Didn't we say there that it could be even more than 2,000? So what's going on here? Right, what is it? Is it 2,000, 1,000? Explain how your opinion works. No, really, you can't. You don't bring me questions based on the case of where the city that looks like a bow. Because there they shoot right there are houses in between the two on the right side and the left side, right? This little, see where there's the olive. This is the big difference here, right? There's these houses in between that you theory could walk from Bet through Olive to Bet. So that's therefore a different story than in our case where there's an actual gap between the two of them, right? So you can't compare them. And also in terms of we mentioned this also the different distance between, let's say, the Gimel and the Olive here, right? Is also here the question: how much can this be? So that's also a relevant question where we say that we're more lenient. So, right. So again, how does it make a big difference that one's continuous settlement and one there's gaps? They should be treated differently because there's gaps. So Amar Rav Bamarle Rav Labai. So Rav said to Baye, Kami Ibn Chitzon. So what's the limit between the outer ones? Kami Hey, why not Glockman? Who cares how far it is between the two outermost edges of the bow? Kol Ilu Shemachmas Emsai Benehan in Benzeh. So what do you mean? Like, does it matter how big the gap is between them? It's like in terms of the way that one of the diagram here, he's like, no, it doesn't matter how big the gap is, as long as you slide it on up, assuming it's close enough to these original two cities. As long as after you slide it on up, the 141 and a third and 141 and a third gap between where it's slid up, and that's what matters. So the question is, so how far is the gap willing to be? Even if it's 4,000 amma between the two cities, which is bigger than we had by the Kesha case, he says yes. Even if the gap between the two cities before it slides on up is more than 4,000, that's still okay. Amar Ravuna. Here, Hasuya Yashet Imish Ben Sherashah Pachot Merbat Alafim Amamudin La Minayater Vim Lab Mudin La Minakeshet. Vim Lab Mudin La Minakeshet, right? So what do you mean? So then we say that in this case, right? This is the case of the bow. That there's a limit that if the gap between the bet and the bet is less than 4,000, then you can square it off. Where the gimel is, which is called the yet there, that's the bowstring. But if it's more than that, the answer is the way you measure your tlum is you have to simply draw you have to draw the tlum around it as if it's a rectangle, but you don't get the whole area from measuring from here. You would do this awkward, you see the here. So I'll give an example. So you draw a square like this on one corner. And then let's see what I just did over there. And then you draw again over here like that. And then you draw another one in the middle, kind of here like this. And then you wouldn't be drawing a simple square anymore. It would be this, it would come out like a blocky U was what you'd wind up with instead of, a nice square. That's simply how the city is built. So that's you'd be stuck with. So, Amrlay says, no, I can fix this. Hatam leka lememar male hafa ikol lememar male. Now there's no reason to fill it in because it's because of the bow and it's too far apart. But here, right, because we say that we project that third village between the two of them, we slide it on up. Therefore, we will say that it'll work. Right, so there's a difference between, in this case, right, the gap, you can't slide this on up there because there's things in the way, but here, we say you really can't just simply slide it on up, and that's what makes things work just fine. So that's why we're actually more making in the case where they're not connected than they are connected. So, Omerle, Rav Safra Larava. So Rav Safra said to Rava, Hani b'nei akistafon, the mashkina lahu tkuma mehagisa the arsh there, b'nei tkuma the arsh there, the mashkina tkuma mehagisa the akistafon. My apologies for mispronouncing those Greek names. So, people who do akistafon, maybe their tkuma based on this from the far end of the city of Ardish. Ardish measure their tkuma from the far end of Kistafon as if, and they treat them as if they're one city. But what's the problem? But wait, the cities are on two different banks of the Tigris River. So, but now for that, we've got this nice photo over here, right? This is how the cities go, right? It's a city on two sides of the river. How can that work? So Nafak Athvele Hanak Tamata Dashura Tamibla B'Digla Shivim Amma V'Shirai. So answer is that Rava went out and showed Rav Safra the foundation of the wall of one of the cities, which was submerged in the Tigris River, distance of 70 amma, meaning the cities were actually linked, being prior to some terrible flooding, they had been one city, then the river moved, or their dam had collapsed, and now they're not separated, but there still is that remnant of the wall between. That is Bruri Ladira. Therefore, it can combine the two separate, or if it's not really Ladira, but as long as the function of the wall of some sort, it's still sufficient to and sufficiently high out of the water that is enough to connect the two cities. Okay, so we're gonna save the next Mishnah for tomorrow. So now let's recap what we've done today. We covered a lot of ground and a lot of measuring, which is again not familiar territory for most people, unless somebody here is a high school math teacher. I mean, I was in the past, but I'd have to assume nobody else was. So okay, so let's go over it again. So again, so we started talking about measuring out of the Zichron, how typically we square. Let me scroll up with the diagrams. That would probably be easy for everybody else to remember. So again, we started out talking about beginning of the paragraph is talking about how to square off cities and how to measure the Zichron, right? Where does the city end, right? So we're discussing the differences between the today's stuff. Talking about the differences between, let's say, the Midrash, the empty area around the city that makes it look pretty, versus a place where they plant their vineyards and orchards and fields. All right, so then we talk about the ratios of the area. It's supposed to be 1/4. So we're figuring out how they worked out. The city 2,000 by 2,000, city 1,000 by 1,000. We're talking about, does it make a difference based on, is the city a circle, is the city a square? And we spoke about, then we try to figure out how that work out with the area wise, and which is it a circle and a square, square and a circle. Then we were discussing of which parts is it with ratio work out with, again, which corners being added or not added. Maybe the ratio is only for the corners, like the Midrash, maybe they're only on the corners, just like this bath, right? That diagram 57 was kind of like a crude drawing of the Mizbeach with with the nice 4 corners sticking up. Those are the Midrashim. Right, that's a nice fallow area. Then we went to discuss the differences in area along the diagonals between a circle and a square, and whether it's a squared circle or a circled square. And we also mentioned the fact that in general, the difference between measuring a straight line versus measuring a diagonal is 1.4, also under the square root of 2. But the Gemara uses that as the approximation. Always went discussing the differences of at what point can you measure cities as being a continuous city, one city or not. That was the 141 and the third. Again, the 72 thirds is based on this being the square root of 500, which works out to be approximately 72 thirds. So, right, and that's the area that's called the Karpeth, right? It's the unusable empty area around the city that's meant for beautification purposes. It's kind of like a Midrash, but isn't just more like, but it's more just a buffer zone more so than it is meant to look pretty. And then we said that's how you determine if the city is one city or two cities. The question was to use one Midrash, to use two Midrash, to use one Karpeth or two Karpeths, and then that's Machoka Peter May and Chaim. Then we spoke about then there's Machoka and the Gemara between Rafuna and Rava. And then we had the question of about if you have 3 cities, how does that work out in terms of the slide on up or not, and why that is similar or dissimilar from the case we had in the bow from the previous 2 days. And lastly, we spoke about the case of if we have a river between. Why in theory, you're right, the river is pretty big and will differentiate, but if there's a residence on the river, then that would actually serve to combine the 2 different cities, and that would allow it. So that's also going to be relevant when we're measuring the Zichron. If you happen to have a little troll living underneath your bridge, that'll actually help you in terms of measuring your Zichron between 2 cities. But if there's no troll living there, or no nice guard booth halfway through that somebody could actually live in, then that would mean that you would not be able to, that if the distance is more than 141 and a third, you will not be able to measure up between the 2 sides of the river, which we'll hopefully get to more as we get to discussing the how to do the Zichron in Toronto. Okay.
Rabbi, can you go back to the one with the 3, the 3 with the 1 at the bottom and the 2 at the side? Yeah, that one there. So when you notionally slide the bottom one up on the call to south side, do you still measure 2,000 almost from where it used to be, or do you lose that now? Do you know what I mean? Like where's the limit?
You'll gain it actually.
You'll gain it.
What's happening is you'll have this whole thing will become basically one giant square,
Okay.
more or less,
Okay.
in the end. So you'll get a really lot of area if you're doing it this way. This means that these all combine. So so I'll try and draw. Wait, where's my highlighting tool? There we go. Okay, 1 second. So let's say here. So this so 1 second. Here we go. So basically, the tchum in the end would be something like this. If you see these are close up to combine, you get a really large area in the end.
Okay.
So,
All right.
excellent question. Thank you for pointing that out. So there we go. So this is that you get a really large area if this works out. So, yeah.
All right, Shkoyach, thank you.
My pleasure.
Modim Simcha.
Everybody.
Good morning. Yeah.
Peace and go.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.